So I'm going to get out of the way. I want to introduce you to Ryan. For those of you who are here for the one-day session, Ryan has a number of certifications all in the Agile Lean space. He was a well-recognized and well thought of at the presentation he delivered here in our summit this last year. He's worked in a lot of different industries. He's got a great heart, he's really what I would call an Agile evangelist and a Lean evangelist. And so with that, Ryan, come right up and you want this?
I think I should be set.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
That sure means that I sound important. I probably shouldn't mess this up. All right. So thank you, guys. I appreciate everyone's attending. For the folks that are in the one-day course, you're not getting enough of me, so you decided to spend part of your lunchtime up here, so I appreciate that. And for those that are not in the one-day course, I appreciate you taking some time out to hang with us today. So I got to remember where I'm not supposed to step. I'm going to talk through a couple different things. The title of this talk is The Case for Coaching. It's not specific to any framework or any methodology. It just talks about being that agent of change within an organization. My role in my organization is a software development manager, but I'm also an instrument of change across a platform that's responsible for about 52 million of annual revenue. It's a software package that is used in 42% of the US-based hospitals. So what that means is about 1 out of every 2 nurses that could possibly touch anybody in a clinical situation is using the software that my team is directly responsible for producing. So it's pretty meaningful to me. As we go through and try to tie all this together back to the Agile Lean Institute that's being launched today, I just want to share some other information. I'm plugging my Twitter, which just seems very selfish, but I share a lot of content. Some of it I get directly from Kelly, from Tom, from Harrisburg University. Other I just source from around the web. So if you're a Twitter person, give me a follow, and you'll get a constant daily feed of more information. And also, there is an Agile Uprising coalition, which is a free forum, a free communication, a free community for people of Agile and Lean thinking to come together and share. No credit card or anything. We have about 2 or 3 of the Agile Manifesto authors as members already, and we're executing a 15-year retrospective with them. More on that in future slides. So to start this conversation, let's focus on the difference between principles and practices. Principles are generally understood as things that will never change, things that are constant. They're what are generally accepted as the bedrock of a methodology. Practices change. Things like Scrum, things like Scaled Agile. Scaled actually is versioned, so we're on version 4 now, meaning that versions 1, 2, and 3 have already changed. Some of the emerging Lean concepts, those change. Principles, as I said, on the other hand, stay relatively flat. So what are these principles? As Tom mentioned, today we're halfway through talking about the Lean principles, and those are optimizing the whole. We're not looking at taking silos of the organization and finding ways to be more efficient at that. We're looking at taking the idea, which we call a concept, all the way through the market validation, which we call cash, so that concept to cash spectrum, and making sure that we're optimizing that throughout. A big one for me, we're making sure that we're respecting people. We're creating environments and cultures that foster collaboration, engagement, and happiness, which is sort of a strange thing to talk about when we're talking about work, but I believe happier teams make better products. We focus on delivering fast. We can decompose that into a couple different areas. We're doing that in a class if you're interested in learning more on this. January 24th? Nice. Sell that one out too, make my ego get huge. Deferring commitment, meaning that we make the most educated decisions we can with the information we have, creating knowledge and sharing that knowledge, building quality into the delivery process, and not most importantly, but very important, is the elimination of waste. So the principles of the Agile Manifesto, thank God the authors went so far as to colorfully list them out. This is freely available on the web, but we talk about things like, again, respecting people, working together, letting conversations and change dictate what we do, not just blindly following a plan. When this was written, it was heavily geared towards technology. You had a whole bunch of software methodologists come together in Snowbird, Utah in 2001, 17 to be exact. Each one of them had their own lightweight methodology by which they were delivering software. But the world has evolved. These principles, while still very valid and not changing, could be amended to be talking about products, not just software. And I think that's really important because we're starting to see Agile being leveraged in different industries outside of just technology. We're seeing it in manufacturing. There's cars being built using Scrum methods. Using Agile methods. There are schools being run, governments being run using Agile methods. They're emerging everywhere. So beyond the principles, we actually have a change, and it's as small as it may seem, it was a radical change to the Scrum guide, which is the framework or the underlying documentation behind Scrum, which is an Agile practice, to include values. And the co-creators of Scrum, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, documented these into the Scrum guide this year. Their courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. If you're working on a team and you're trying to coach a team to become better, to create better products, to become better technologists, to be better team members, we need to not just understand these principles, but embody these principles. If you're looking to become a change agent, if you're looking to become a coach, the best way to get teams to adopt these values is to live them yourself. And what you end up finding as a coach is these principles extend beyond the workplace. You start living them outside of work. You start living them at home. You become more of an open partner, an open parent, a better member of society. There's enough bad stuff going on right now that we can all stand to improve a little bit more in each one of these areas, not just at work. So let's talk about some of the Agile practices. Scrum, quite often people confuse Agile and Scrum. Scrum is Agile, Agile is Scrum. That's not necessarily the case. I would say that's actually not the case, but it's a tool by which we can be more Agile. We can actually start imparting Agile thinking into an organization. It's a very lightweight framework. It's a very lightweight practice. It's pretty easy to understand. You can install it in a company, but then you could spend the rest of your career tuning it, making it work better for that organization. It's Kanban, Crystal, Lean Startup, XP, DSDM. There's probably a bunch more. They're the ones that I thought of when I was making this slide. The point here is that there's a million different frameworks. There's a million different practices that we can employ. As a coach, my genuine belief, and I apologize to the folks in the day-long class because I imagine I've said this at least twice, to be an effective enterprise coach, you need to not only understand one, but multiple different frameworks and have succeeded and failed at multiple frameworks. Making one thing work once doesn't make you a coach, that just makes you lucky. So, Tom, you're a tennis guy. Let's start talking about coaching. I'm not a tennis guy, so this is a perfect story. But Roger Federer is well recognized as one of the world-class tennis players for the last 15, 20 years. He has a coach. His name is Severin Luthi. Nailed it. So you have a guy in Roger Federer that has gone on to win multiple Wimbledon championships. He won in 2015. I wrote this slide before the 2016 championship. Thankfully for my laziness, he didn't win. Sorry?
Sorry, just, okay, I'm a tennis fan too. He last won Wimbledon in 2012.
Right, but as of 2015, he had the longest #1 rank of 302 weeks, the most number of Grand Slam titles, which is 17. See, I'm not a fan, I can read though. And he's reached the Wimbledon final a record 10 times. Yeah?
Yeah, it's accurate.
Cool. My wife played tennis professionally, so she knows this stuff. I don't. I just kind of glom onto it. So we can all agree based on this, Roger Federer is the man, right? He is the cream of the crop, top of the table type tennis player, arguably maybe one of the best in the world ever, right? No offense to Serena, she may be better. So here's the story for you. Severin and Roger were just practicing one day. They were fooling around on the tennis court. And here's where I'm going to butcher it. So you're not going to say I was right on this one, I bet. So Severin was just serving to Roger. And generally accepted tennis practices, you wait for the serve, you return, however you return. and then the volley starts and you get more aggressive and you play the patterns. What Roger was doing one time was he just leaped into the serve. Rather than wait for it to come to him, he leaped into it, which threw off the timing because it's a generally accepted pattern that you wait for the ball to come to you. They joked about it, they laughed about it, and then he did it again. And Severin said, you need to do that in match play. He pushed him. He said, you think it's silly, but try it in a match. Try it in a match. And what ended up happening was this became known as the saber method, the sneak attack by Roger. It was disruptive to the serves of world-class champions. And it's still used today by him. I don't know if anyone else actually adopted it. But here's the point of the story. This wasn't that long ago. I think this was in 2013, 2014, maybe 2012 when this came about. Roger Federer was not just at the top of his game now. He was at the top of his game then, and he's getting benefited from the coaching of his coach. So you have a guy that arguably is better than everyone in the world still employing effective coaching in his game. So what does that mean? Coaching is not a downward command and control activity where we tell people what to do. It's something where you actually, the best coaches use their eyes and their ears more than their mouth. You get yourself ingrained into the pulse and the culture of the team, and you understand what makes them effective, what actually intrinsically motivates them, while layering in your anecdotal and empirical expertise. You show them how they can find better ways of solving problems they already have, but let them discover it themselves. The interesting thing, when you go through some of the formal learning on coaching, which is really becoming a thing these days, they talk about the difference between coaching and consulting. A consultant is usually hired to solve a problem. They get paid a lot of money to come in and fix things, right? And they're typically good consultants do exactly that. They come in, they assess, they adapt, and they install. A good coach does not do that. A good coach actually understands the problem and helps the person they're working with understand it for themselves. It's almost that, it's like that parable, I can give you fish or I can teach you to fish. A coach is in there teaching people how to solve their own problems, assess those problems, and evolve. And again, it's a bidirectional relationship. As a coach, like I fancy myself a coach. I love being a coach because I learn as much from my teams as my teams generally learn from me, if not more the other way around. I'm selfish. So what does a coach look like? This is what is accepted as the coaching framework. It was rolled out last year by the International Coaching Consortium. Lisa Atkins, if you're an Agile person, she is the godmother of Agile coaching. She's what they consider the coach's coach. And this is just a way to visualize what it is what are the skills or what are the facets that embody an effective Agile coach. And what you're meant to do is continue to learn. So you go through and you almost use these as personal radar charts where you color in how effective you are. So if you think you're really good in the business, you scribble all the way down to the business. And what ends up happening is you do this at a regular iteration. I try to do mine every 6 months. And you find out, hey, I thought I was really good at mentoring until I found out what mentoring really was, and I sucked. So I have to go back and learn how to mentor better. So you go through and you figure these things out. I think that effective coaches focus specifically on enabling happiness in organizations. I know that that's not what is generally heard when you talk about technology. You don't necessarily say good technologists drive happiness. But I believe that there's a relationship between quality products, good products, effective products in the marketplace, and happy teams. So in my mind, at least in my current mind, I take the train every day, so you can see why I picked a subway map here. Effective coaches foster engagement, safety, experimentation, curiosity, empathy, and mindfulness. If you're doing this in an organization, no matter how big or how small, if you're doing it on one team or if you're doing it across a global organization, it becomes infectious. If you start building an environment of trust and safety, you start accelerating these other areas. As soon as you start showing empathy for others, they start showing empathy for others within the organization. How that manifests itself is you start building better products. I'm in Harrisburg. I realize that. If you work for the government, you're going to say this touchy-feely junk doesn't work, right? So let me take a different tact. I know how to get to you guys. Often, organizations go through transformations. They take a team, they take different leaders, they send them off for 2 days, they get trained, they get a certification that calls them a master after 2 days. They then go back, and the organization is instantly transformed into a lean, agile organization, right? No? All right. So here's the trick. When you go to a training, you're going to remember roughly 22% of what you were taught. And that 22% is kind of a rough number. If you are then reinforced back in the office or in the workspace, some of the stuff Tom was mentioning with the rollout of the Lean Agile Lean organization, some of the coaching and the training that the Harrisburg is going to be providing, that number increases to 88%, right? Yes. So, touchy-feely junk aside, if we need to talk numbers, the numbers are this. You can quadruple the effectiveness of the investment towards your transformation, and by the way, have a better transformation outcome by leveraging coaching. Good coaching doesn't happen by accident. It's usually a conscious decision made by a forward-thinking thought leader. All right. So, how do you become a coach? Again, I think the most effective coaches are the ones that are versed in multiple different frameworks. They've succeeded and failed in various different ways. You learn more from your failures than you do success. Myself, I have failed every way possible. I've tried bottom up, I've tried top down, I've tried Scrum, Kanban, SAFe. I've succeeded and failed in hilarious ways on nearly all of those, excuse me. But first and foremost, an effective coach, my story is simple. I decided to get a deep appreciation for the principles. I deconstructed everything I could. Even recently, I was talking to Tom Shives about going to an introductory Scrum Master training. I've been practicing Scrum for years, and he's like, why would you go to an introductory course again? Because you're always going to learn. If you're not seeking out continuous information, there's a 50-page Scrum book that was like the most basic book that was released, I think, in 2 years that came out this year. I went out and bought it and read it the day it came. You have to go through and get a deep appreciation for the principles and the practices and live them every day, because you're going to learn something no matter what. You also have to be prepared to fail. I've said it a few times now that you learn more through your failures than you do your successes. I think assuming that you were successful once and you're just going to rinse, repeat that solution is pretty short-sighted. A lot of times that's what we, as people, we're conditioned to that. Hey, this worked. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing this. But here's the secret. Technology is hyper-complex. It is the most complex thing that I am aware of. Aside from our relationships. Teams are unique. No two teams are alike. So thinking that one thing that worked for one team is going to then be able to be lifted and shifted into another organization it's a very early mistake. If you're early in your coaching practice, that's something that you're going to run into. And I can't tell you not to do it. You're going to do it no matter what. Just be aware when that happens that you need to be more observational and more pragmatic in your installations. The problems that create the anti-patterns that the organization is looking to solve are also unique. They're as unique as the teams. There are common themes throughout organizations. When you do these talks, or when I was talking to some of the people in the one-day course today, there are themes to the problems, but how they created the problems or how those problems manifest themselves in the organization, you have to have a unique understanding for. And you also have to be adaptive. What worked today will not work tomorrow, and what didn't work today may actually work again tomorrow. So you have to, as a coach, constantly be experimenting and working towards a better end state. Without getting too deep, and by no means would a slide like this pretend to talk about neuroscience, but you have to have an appreciation for psychology and neuroscience to understand what those intrinsic motivators are for people, and what those trigger points are to make people feel more engaged and feel more involved in the transformation itself and in the learning. And you also have to understand that you can't fix everything. As a coach, you're going to want to, especially early on, fix all the problems, right? We go through, we do assessments, we do interviews, we understand what the wastes are within the organization, what the anti-patterns are within the organization. You want to solve everything. You can't. You need to pick your battles. You need to prioritize that process improvement flow. So we're going to tell a quick story. It's called the starfish parable. I'm not sure. Anyone ever heard this one before? All right. I'll try not to butcher this one. I did all right with tennis, so I'll try not to butcher this parable. I think I did all right with tennis, yeah? Thank you. Starfish parable. So there's an early morning at the ocean. A little boy wakes up, goes down to the beach, sees the tide brought in all of these starfish. As far as you can see, you couldn't step without stepping on one. They're on the beach, in the sun, starting to die. Little boy picks up the starfish, throws it back over the breakers so that it gets back into the water and can live. He does this a few times. Out of the horizon comes an older man, walks up to the boy and says, "You stupid boy, what are you doing?" He's like, doesn't miss a beat, picks up a starfish, throws it into the water. He's like, "There's too many, you're not gonna make a difference, it doesn't matter." The little boy doesn't miss a beat, picks up the next starfish, throws it back into the ocean, looks at the old man and says, "It mattered to that one." So here's the thing. As a coach, you're gonna want to save everyone. You're gonna want to fix every problem that you can uncover, because all of these things that we work on are meant to identify problems. They don't tell you how to solve the problems. So as a coach, you're gonna take it as a personal mission to solve them. We need to identify where our efforts are most focused. We're not gonna be able to fix everything. We're gonna have to fix the teams that are most coachable and the problems that are worth solving. So as you go through your transformation into coach, as you emerge as a coach, you need to identify those two things. Who is receptive to coaching and where is their value? Also, as a coach, you're gonna have various different titles. If you remember, mine isn't coach, it's software development manager, which still boggles me. Sometimes they will be scrum masters. Sometimes they will just be general line managers. There's many different titles that you can have, but I think even at the micro level, everybody has the ability to coach something in the organization. If it's a person, if it's a process, if it's a tool, we can move things forward following simple practices. So let's talk a little bit about titles. There's a story of a military general. There was an annual conference, and as an act, I think he was a 3- or 4-star general, he would be flown in first class to the conference, reach the airport, step off of his plane, and there would be a person there with his name, General Smith, or whatever his name was. He would then take his bag, put him into a black car, private drive him to the hotel where he was pre-registered, checked in, taken up to his room, and sat and waited for the next morning. The next morning he wakes up, goes down, there's a car waiting, taking him straight to the back entrance of the conference, where he's handed a ceramic coffee cup that is holding piping hot coffee that he drinks and brings up to the podium as he delivers his speech. 12 months later, same general retires, is invited back to the same talk. He is flown coach to the airport. When he gets off, he looks for his driver. There's no driver, so he drags his bags to the waiting line for the taxi stand, waits in line for a taxi, goes to the hotel, checks himself in, smaller room, wakes up in the morning to go to the conference, has to get in line again to get a cab, takes the cab to the conference, goes to general registration of the conference to finally find his space in the back room. When he asks for a cup of coffee, it's brought to him in a styrofoam cup. Same guy, same or better experience because he's a year older, a year wiser, delivering a similar talk at the same conference. He realized something that day. The ceramic cup was never meant for him. A ceramic cup is meant for a title. As coaches, we need to be careful of being hyper-conscious of our titles. We need to be more effective on our outcomes than what we label ourselves. What value do you provide to the organization? Sure, we all have to we have to cover our costs, we have to cover our overhead, we have to improve our situations for our families, but let's not be too tough on ourselves on wrapping into titles. So, to me, next slide is my favorite, by the way. To me, the best coaches are humble and understated. So, as a coach, there are a few things that we need to make sure we do. We need to find our own identity. We need to define our why before we help a company or an organization or a team define their why. We also need to make sure that we continue our learning journey. Never stop. As soon as you think you are an expert at something, realize you're further from that than you've ever assumed you are. There is always something more to learn in this hyper-dynamic industry. As much as coaches are important to teams, mentors are important to individuals. If you don't have a mentor, I would strongly urge you, if you take nothing away from this talk, to identify a mentor and work with them. I personally have 2. I also I exercise myself as a mentor for others. It's a very special relationship that you have. I think effective coaches understand the relationship with mentors because that makes them stronger as coaches. Last but not least, they also have to master the basics. So I know it's kind of contradictory. You can't be a master, like if you think you're a master of something, then you're far from it. But you have to live and breathe this stuff. You can't just sit in an office in the corner talking about how things should be unless you're actually doing them. Last week I ran a retrospective for my program. It's probably the first time I've done a retrospective in 2 months, and I swear it's the most invigorating thing I've done in a long time because I got to go back to the basics. I got to go through running an effective retrospective, and the purpose of doing it was twofold. First, it was a meta retro. We were trying to get a lot more information across the program, not just at the team level, but it was also an opportunity for me to inadvertently coach my teams on how to run retrospectives, a different effective way to exercise one of those practices that is probably the most important as an Agile organization. Excuse me. So a quick story on the basics, and I touched on this a little. There's two movements that are kind of going on right now, one that I'm very loosely attached to and one that I'm more directly attached to. Alistair Coburn is one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto. He is a brilliant thought leader, very interesting guy to get to know, but he's starting a movement called the Heart of Agile. If you're not familiar, you might want to jot it down. There's some writing on it. He's taking all of these hyper-complex things that we created to mystify what Agile is and what these frameworks are, and he's distilled them down into 4 areas. I would really recommend, if you are early in your Agile journey, or even if you're mature, to just reconcile yourself with those 4 areas. Secondly, and there's actually a Heart of Agile conference. I think it's coming to Philly and Pittsburgh, not Harrisburg, but Philly and Pittsburgh in 2017. So I'm loosely attached with that just because I look up to Alistair. Secondly, I mentioned it early on, my organization, my professional organization that I work with outside of my work, we're going through and we're reconciling with as many of those 17 Agile Manifesto authors as possible. So far we've got 4, I think. And what we're doing is we're asking them, what were you doing before the Manifesto event? How did you get invited to the Manifesto event? What do you remember of the event itself? And what do you hope for the future of Agile? And what we're doing is we're open sourcing this. We're as iteratively and as incrementally as possible, we're delivering this content freely back out to the community. In doing it, we actually uncovered something that's really cool. If you're an Agile nerd like me, I remember when I first saw this, my hands were trembling a little bit. My wife thought I was losing my mind. We have the original meeting notes from one of the authors. So everything he thought as he was going through that 2-day event in Snowbird, all of his handwritten notes with the pre-prepared agenda, and it talks about each of these guys, these Agile thought leaders that we put on pedestals, and how they came, what they came with, how they were prepared to run the Manifesto event itself. Freely available on the Agile Uprising, agileuprising.com. All right, quick recap. Agile coaching, the first thing that you need to do is you need to engage. You need to be situationally aware of what's going on within your organization to be effective. You need to mentor and have a mentor. You need to create safety within the organization. The only way people are going to learn is if you have a safe environment, that you have the freedom to fail, and where people are allowed to make decisions without being second-guessed. You need to practice empathy with your teams. You also need to be aware. Know what your shortcomings are, know what the team needs. Know when to ask for help. You have to be present. You have to be on the floor, shoulder to shoulder, not in an office, hidden away, or on a phone all day. You also have to be coachable yourself. We talked about the starfish parable, about focusing your time and your effort on the teams that are coachable. Realize that we ourselves as coaches, as change agents, as managers, whatever label you want to put on yourself, you also have to be receptive. You're not always going to be right. Just because you are a coach doesn't mean you have the right answers. You have to master the basics the best you can. You have to live the basics. You have to, day in and day out, understand what it means to do the things that we ask teams to do. And usually you say last but not least, but you need to be humble. I did not like when Tom introduced me. I'll be honest about that. You have to be on an ever-present journey to continue to learn and to give all praise and all thanks to the teams, because at the end of the day, they're the ones putting out the work. We're just catalysts for that. So that's my story. Any questions?
Particularly looking at the last slide, differentiate a leader versus a coach.
I don't know that you can. I mean, if you're an effective coach, I feel like you're leading. And if you're an effective leader, I imagine you're coaching. If you ask me about manager and leader or manager and coach, I can have a different conversation.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else?
Would you recommend that any one of the Agile approaches is appropriate by itself for a certain organization, or do you recommend like a blended mix and match?
So I would say this. The right answer is it depends based on the problem that you're looking to solve and the people you have to solve it with. But I would say for an organization that's early into a transformation, I would not recommend blending, because then you conflate practices, right? You need a clear vision of where we're heading, and I think sticking with a framework gets you to that vision faster. A lot of times what happens, organizations pick and choose pieces of frameworks so that they can actually just lift their current format and put it into an Agile format and not change a damn thing. So why even bother? So I would say you have to pick one of the frameworks and stick with it to maximize effectiveness. But I mean, somebody probably has a use case that says the opposite. I'm just painting with a broad brush. The big thing is to understand what problems you're looking to solve, not picking a framework and then mapping to it. Get an appreciation for what the organizational issue is, and then finding a framework that best complements that.
So coaches ask good questions. Do you have like a series of questions or something that you use in your coaching toolbox? I know you probably hate to refer to it that, but are there a set of questions that you use a lot in your practice?
I'm sure there are on the spot. So I can tell you the questions I get asked a lot that get asked of me is the most common question is always, how do I get my managers to embrace Agile? Hands down. And I'll share with you guys, I've given talks in various countries, in various parts of the country, to various industries. That is the lifeblood of most conversations. How do I get my organization to embrace Agile? And the answer to that question, I mean, if there was a single answer to that question that I can package into a program and sell, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be retired on an island. But the real answer is, it goes back to what I said a moment ago. What problems are you looking to solve? If you're looking for a way to just relabel your existing framework, I'm not really interested in helping you solve that. Just do what you're doing today, call it whatever you want. If you're looking to deliver things faster, if you're looking to engage your people, if you're looking to build a continuum of learning within the organization, sure, let's have that conversation. Let's break that down.
I got one comment on what you just said. What I've seen in the industry a lot is, program managers are risk averse. Like, what you see is not on my program. Whatever that thing is, not on my program. And one way forward on that is to pick something that maybe isn't as risky. Call it a pilot, call it let's test drive it over here, and if it fails, well, it failed, but it's not going to sink the ship, right? So a way forward on something like that would be to try and find a problem to be solved that is maybe just an interesting problem, and if it's success, you can show the success, you can prove the value add, you can prove the money saved, however you want to measure it. But it's not something that is going to, put you off in a dip somewhere.
So in the one-day course that we're halfway through right now, we talk about the use of experiments to drive forward the organization. And I think that's a safe way to do exactly what you're saying. I mean, realistically, and I've given another talk in this same auditorium where I talk about top-down versus bottom-up transformations. I think you need some degree of top-level support. Where that support comes in at, it varies. But it's hard for a single team to catastrophically reorganize the way the operations of a large global company work. You need some degree of air cover from your top-level support to win hearts and minds. But I like using experiments. It's, you live what you preach. If you're wrong faster. And you find out, you learn from it. The trick is, with that, too often you have those pilot projects or those experiments that are run, they fail, and then we just never do anything. a failure is actually a really good thing. You now know what doesn't work. Let's try something different. Let's increment on top of that and figure out how we can move the needle. That one didn't work. There's probably a better solution somewhere else.
So you would advise in some situations, 1 or 2 groups transitioning to Agile is better than trying to do everyone in one?
I think that's, honestly, I've had personal success with that, yes. And the way you actually, oh, I'm sorry, the question was to install, I'm going to add some words because I'm not good at parroting back. To install the best, most effective change, take 1 or 2 teams, transform those, and use that to drive the overarching organizational shift. Yeah? So there's actually a term called seed and split. And what you do is you form a team, and you get that team to be high performing, and then you split that team. So you split it in half, you add 2 other halves to it, so now you have 2 teams that are carrying forward the culture of that first successful team, and you continue to bud those off, and you end up then driving scaling change across the organization. That is effective. I think you could also hit it a little bit harder if you had a strong coaching practice within the organization, and you can get multiple teams up and running at the same time. There's obviously a lot more coordination to that. But yes, that's exactly what I've done in the past, to be honest. All right. All right, well, I appreciate it. And who's ever not in the class this afternoon, thank you for stopping in today.